Hi, my name is Liz Valle, and this video is about the Divine Wisdom Festival. The Divine Wisdom Festival is a showcase of digitally mediated worship practices. At the time I conducted this research, I was assistant professor of homiletics and worship at McCormick Theological Seminary in Chicago. This was during the summers of 2020 and 2021. First, let's look at the research project, then we will look at the findings and finally at the implications or applications. The Divine Wisdom Festival studies digitally mediated worship practices using phenomenological and anthropological methodologies in order to establish the embodied experience, presence, and active participation from the perspectives of the worshipers, depending on the technology that the worship leaders employ. This research will serve Christian worshiping communities, mostly in seminary chapels and in congregations, offering worship leaders criteria for discernment of the digital mediations and communication systems best suited for their worshiping community. The key questions of this research were, what is real worship? And to lead to that big question, the guiding questions were, can virtual bodies be at worship online? Can bodies be present? What is active participation in online worship? What is the embodied experience of worshipers during an online worship service? What does worship should look, feel, sound, taste, smell like when it is digitally mediated? The research method we used was conducting a series of 7 different worship services. The same worship service was mediated through different technologies, and then we interviewed people who attended the different services. Some people attended more than one mediation, but at different dates. And so what I'm going to be sharing with you is the summary of what those people who we interviewed, who were worshipers at these services, what they experienced in terms of their presence, their sense of embodiment, and their sense of active participation. The technologies that we use include first video conference. We had one group inside of the video conference doing the worship service, and we had another group watching a live streaming of the video conference worship service, which was intended for those in the room. Quickly, we learned that those outside, those that were watching the live stream, didn't feel connected, so we switched. And then we still use the video conference methodology, but this time we had people, and we interviewed people who were watching the live streaming of the video conference worship intended for both audiences. That audience that was inside of the conference room or the conference call, the video conference call, and those watching live streaming on social media, watching the live stream on social media. And then we interviewed other groups who watched the recordings that remained of these worship services. They watched them later. So they were watching a recording of a live event. And then the fourth modality that we interviewed was people who gathered at a particular time, a particular day and time, to together watch the premiere of a totally pre-recorded video. Those totally pre-recorded videos were not of a live event. They were carefully prepared. Usually, these premiere worship services are carefully designed and recorded and edited, and then premiered for the whole congregation to participate. And usually they are premiered at the usual time of worship. This research project was conducted before the modality of having people inside of the sanctuary and online was more common among Protestant traditions. In the short introduction to the whole project, the 5-minute video that you probably have watched before watching this longer explanation, I mentioned that this was a common practice before the COVID-19 pandemic among mega churches or churches that had the resources to broadcast their services. So these are the 4 modalities in which we did this research project. So what were the findings? Let's see. In sum, worship mediates a connection between humans and the divine. And yet, what does that mean and how it should be practiced varies across worshiping communities. Here, I should say that the groups that we invited to worship are very diverse. We have people of very different ages, multiple traditions, all Christians, but not of the same theology, not of the same liturgical practices, because these worship services were conducted at a seminary that values diversity and that has great diversity among their student body. Nonetheless, we invited people from other contexts as well to make sure that we had good representation of different sexual orientations, different genders, different denominations, Christian denominations, different theologies of worship, and different proclamation practices. This video focuses on the worship service as a whole and the sense, again, of presence, active participation, and embodiment of those who participated in these worship services. When worship services happen online, our research found that worshipers feel present when they are able to focus. Worshipers feel present when they are able to focus. It has nothing to do with their bodies. Whether they are in the service, in the sanctuary, or at home watching, they feel present if they can focus. Second finding, the one related to active participation, is that active participation helps worshipers be present. So there we found an interconnection between these two concepts. So when worshipers felt that they were actively participating, that they were able to focus better. And finally, we found that worshipers' embodied experiences are related to their feelings and thoughts more than anything else. And this has a lot to do because with the fact that the participants in the research define embodied experience in several different ways. We did not define these terms for them. They were defining the terms themselves, or they answered the questions according to what they understood means presence, active participation, and embodied experience. As you can see, we found that there is an interrelation between the 3 main concepts, the concept of presence, active participation, and embodied experience. And so I'm gonna now explain what are those interrelationships, looking more deeply at each one of these concepts. Let's begin with participation. I'm sorry, presence. Let's begin with presence. The worshipers report being present when they are able to focus. Presence is higher in video conference with little or no effort from the participant. Presence in social media, watching live others worship in a video conference room and watching together a pre-recorded video is in and out. Their focus is in and out. More worshipers report being zoning in and zoning out of the service when watching a recording of a prior live worship service. We found that what helps increase the sense of presence is invitation to get artifacts, to get objects, connecting with the singer when the singer is singing something familiar, focusing intentionally, active participation, singing prayers that connect with what people are thinking about, and when the speaker looks straight into the camera, their words. What hinders the sense of presence in worshipers are mostly three kinds of challenges: external, internal, and theological disagreements. External distractions, internal distractions, and theological disagreements. Among external distractions that get in the way of presence, participants of the research reported ambient noises, unexpected guests at the space if they are in their house and somebody arrives, or deliveries, whether they are waiting for them or not. And among the internal distractions, participants reported wandering thoughts, hyperactive personality, and among the theological disagreements, worshipers reported that they disconnect when they hear something that goes against their existing theological paradigms. This is self-reported. I would argue that they didn't disconnect, that they just had a negative experience, but they were still engaged. But they self-report that their sense of presence or their ability to focus decreases when they hear something that goes against their existing theological paradigms. What did we find about active participation? We found that active participation increases the ability to focus. Factors that increase active participation include prompts from the worship leaders, for example, to sing along, to stand up, to close their eyes, to type in the comments box, and to react with emojis. Words on the screen, facilitation of activities, such as breathing or building an altar. Factors that lead to passive participation include doing something in the video conference room that those watching live are not invited to do or cannot do. Or when worshipers disagree with the kind of activity that worshipers are invited to do. If they disagree with the kind of activity, then they don't accept the invitation, they don't accept the invitation, or they don't follow the instructions, and then their participation becomes passive. Except for those worshiping live via video conference, all others consider watching a screen passive participation. So I'm going to say that in a different way. The only ones who considered that they were actively participating were those who were worshiping live inside of a video conference. All others reported that watching a screen constitutes passive participation. Active participation when watching a recording of a prior live worship service and watching with others a pre-recorded worship service were of the same kinds. The kind of active participation that people reported was singing out loud, responding orally, and typing comments. Yes, this sounds contradictory, and it was contradictory. Again, this is what they reported. On the one hand, they feel that watching a screen is passive participation. On the other hand, they report that even though they were watching a live service, if they are singing out loud, or even when they are watching a pre-recorded worship service, and there's no synchronicity, that if they are watching it after the premiere, if they are singing out loud, if they are responding orally, if they are typing comments, they feel that they are actively participating. Now, that's the way in which we can interpret that is contradictory. There is a way in which we can interpret that it is not contradictory. Watching the screen alone is passive participation. But once I get to sing along, I get to shout out my praises, say amen, or respond to what the leaders are saying, or type in a chat box, then I am actively participating. So that way it's not contradictory. Those who reported highest number of active participations were those watching a recording of a prior live worship service. This is interesting because this is the same group that report the highest amount of being zoning in and out of the service. That is, the group with the greatest difficulty focusing was the group that was watching a recording of a prior live worship service. This group also reported the highest number of passive participations. Embodied experience. Reports of worshipers' embodied experience is all over the place. There are many different understandings of what it is. Some worshipers associate embodied experience with mental presence or with being focused. Some worshipers associate it with feeling God's presence. Other worshipers associate it with what is going on in their bodies, which is what the question actually intended. Except for those worshiping via a social media live service, that they were watching a live stream on social media. Others worship in Zoom. All other groups reported that flowing with the service or synchronicity with other worshipers was happening. So the only ones that reported that they did not feel that they were flowing with the service or that they were synchronizing with the other worshipers were those that were watching a live stream of a video conference that was not intended for them. Worshipers reporting having embodied experiences when they disagreed with what worship leaders were saying or doing, when they felt something, for example, curiosity, a sense of peace, calm, the pain of another, when their imagination or memory was engaged through poetry or a memory was triggered, or when they were doing something like praying, singing, typing, breathing, moving, fidgeting, cooking, walking, drinking. So to say that in a different way, participants of this research reported that they had an embodied experience when they felt something, when their imagination or memory was engaged, or when they were doing something. That's why embodied experience is tied to feelings or thoughts, but also to active participation as the body is doing something. So let's see what could be the applications of these findings. The first thing we did, now let's refresh what is that we found. This is what we found. That worship mediates a connection between humans and the divine, and yet what does that mean and how it should be practiced varies across worshiping communities. This answers the first research question: what is worship? Is a mediation of a connection between humans and the divine. But what does that mean, that connection, and how it should be practiced varies across worshiping communities. The second research question, when the answers that we found were that when the worship services happen online, worshipers feel present when they are able to focus. So they associate presence with focus. When worship services happen online, active participation helps worshipers be present. When worship services happen online, worshipers' embodied experiences are related to their feelings and thoughts and what they're doing with their bodies. So with those findings, we were able to rank the different technologies and how people feel more or less engaged. And this graphic ranks the different modalities of technology from the most engaged the one that provides most engagement to the one that provides the least amount of engagement. The one that most engaged participants was the video conference, just by themselves. Those who are inside of the video conference with the ability to type in the chat, to share their screen, to place emojis, all those things that some video conferences are able to do, or allow participants to do, those were the ones that reported the most amount of engagement. The second ones were a tie of sorts between those who are watching a live streaming of a video conference worship intended for both audiences, that inside of the video conference and that outside of the video conference watching live, and those watching a premiere of a totally pre-recorded videos worship service. The next level of engagement comes from watching a live streaming of a video conference worship service intended for those in the room. So these people were the ones watching this worship service happen, but the worship leaders of the video conference were not inviting or talking to these watching live. So these reported more engagement than the next one in live. However, they reported no flow, no synchronicity, and no connection with the divine and with the community. So therefore, we are kind of canceling it out, recommending that's not a good way to engage people, having them watching a live streaming of a worship service or a recording later of a worship service that is intended for, so voyeurism here does not work. It works to engage people, but it does not work to help people connect and synchronize with the divine and with a worshiping community. And finally, the least amount of engagement comes from watching later a video of a live event. So those who are watching live have more engagement than those that watch later, but those watching live report no connection whatsoever, whereas those that watch later and the recording does report synchronicity or connection with the divine and with other members of the community. So what kind of recommendations come out of this? Here are some do's and don'ts. Do use more action verbs. The more action verbs we use as prompts during the worship service, the more present and actively participating worshipers feel, the more focused they are. Because if you use an action verb and they agree with it, they do it, then they have an embodied experience and they feel that they are actively participating, which helps them be focused and so feel present. Do video conference, because it is the one that generates the greatest sense of connection with the worshiping community. So the video conference technology that allows participants to fully have full agency, that's the one that generates the greatest sense of connection with the worshiping community. But as you know, this is good for small groups worshiping. Our groups were 30 people or so. If you were to have a congregation of 150 people or 1,500 people, if you were to do this, you will have to browse through several screens to get to see everybody. And it will be a little bit chaotic to have everybody have the power to share, to open their mics or shut their mics or all of that, which is why most mega churches and big churches prefer to use the webinar modality and not give people the opportunity to talk whenever they want or to share their screen or things like that. So video conference is the one that generates the greatest sense of connection with the worshiping community, as long as the worshiping community is small, and I will say 50 people or so. When having two simultaneous audiences, do pay attention and speak to both and look at both. So Now, even though we did not do research with the current modality of doing hybrid or dual modality, with some people physically present in the room and some people watching the live stream, is the same concept. When they were on the screen, you could look at the litter boxes, like I'm pretending to look at the litter boxes now, but I'm really looking at the letters that you are seeing on the screen, and you can look at the camera, in which case the people who are in their living rooms can feel, or wherever they are, can feel that you're talking to them, and you should be talking to them. You know, and in this sense, leaders say phrases like, and if you're watching from home, and if you're watching online, for those of you joining us online, and things like that. So do pay attention and speak to both audiences, the ones in the room or the screen, and those that are on the other side of the camera. Watching a recording of a prior live worship service is the least engaging. Maybe we should not be doing that one. And watching a live stream of a service intended for those in the room generates no sense of connection with the divine and the worshiping community. So definitely we shouldn't be doing that one. If we consider that worship is supposed to mediate a connection between the divine and the humans, then we shouldn't do that one. I want to point out that the second to last refers to watching a recording of a prior live worship service. Watching a totally pre-recorded, carefully curated, super nice video has the same effect when people watch it on their own after the fact. When people watch it at the same time during the premiere, they do have a sense of connection because they can chat with one another if they are on the main social media platforms for videos and for interaction. So in that sense, even though they are not able to talk into the worship service with their voice, they can type comments or emojis into a chat box and interact with one another as they comment. So these are the recommendations, and this is in a nutshell what we learned about the interrelationship between presence, active participation, and embodied experience. Embodied experience is triggered or known to the person when the person is feeling something or thinking something, especially when they disagree with the thoughts, or where they are doing something. When they are doing something, they feel that they are actively participating on where they are talking. So action verbs are good. And when they feel that they are actively participating, they are able to focus. And if they are able to focus, they feel that they are fully present in the worship service, whether they are in or out. And that is true whether they are live streaming or they are in the sanctuary, in the room where the worship service is happening. They reported that based on prior experiences from when they were worshiping in the sanctuary. They would say like, yeah, I could be there. And if my mind was in another place, like I wasn't feeling, I wasn't flowing, I wasn't connected, I wasn't worshiping. So this is what we found. The Divine Wisdom Festival, a showcase of digitally mediated worship practices. So we encourage you to use pre-recorded videos, but watch them at the same time and at the same time, or using or having two audiences, one inside of the video conference or inside of a room, and talking directly. Create a worship service that is doable and engaging for both who are inside of the place of the worship service and watching live stream online. Thank you for watching this video.